The harsh winter air bit at Frederick Grantham's face as he stood at attention outside the Schönbrunn Palace. 6 years as part of the Imperial Guard had taught him to endure Vienna's bitter cold without visible discomfort. His posture remained impeccable, his gaze forward, though his peripheral vision tracked each diplomat and noble crossing the courtyard. December 1899 marked his 3rd year as personal guard to Lady Theodora Whitfield, daughter of the British ambassador to Austria-Hungary. His duty was simple: protect her from harm, ensure her compliance with court protocols, and, most importantly, report any suspicious activities to his superiors. She was, after all, the daughter of Britain's representative during increasingly tense European relations. Frederick watched as Lady Theodora's carriage approached. Unlike other nobles who flaunted their status, she always emerged with a quiet grace that commanded attention without demanding it. Today she wore a high-necked blue dress, her chestnut hair arranged in an elegant coiffure beneath a modest hat adorned with a single peacock feather, a gift from the Empress herself. "Captain Grantham," she acknowledged with a slight nod as he stepped forward to escort her. "Lady Whitfield," he replied, formal as always. "The Archduchess awaits your presence for tea." "Then we mustn't keep her waiting." As they walked through the palace's grand corridors, Frederick maintained the prescribed distance, close enough to protect, far enough to honor propriety. Lady Theodora's soft footsteps echoed alongside his measured stride, a rhythm they had perfected over the years. What the court didn't know, what Frederick himself scarcely acknowledged, was how his attention to her had evolved from duty to something deeper. He noticed things no report would ever mention: how she always touched the jade pendant at her neck when anxious, how she bit her lower lip when suppressing a clever remark, how her eyes lingered on the palace gardens even in winter. "You're unusually quiet today, Captain," she remarked, breaking protocol by initiating conversation. Frederick hesitated before responding. "Forgive me, my lady. I was considering the security arrangements for tomorrow's Imperial hunt." It was a lie. He had been wondering about the letter he'd intercepted that morning, addressed to her in unfamiliar handwriting, bearing a Russian postal mark. "Of course," she replied, her tone revealing nothing. Always vigilant. They reached the Archduchess's private salon, where Frederick would stand guard outside. As Lady Theodora prepared to enter, she paused. "Captain Grantham, might I request your escort through the Gloriette Gardens afterward? The Archduchess has promised me some botanical specimens for my father's collection." "As you wish, my lady." Hours later, as they walked the snow-dusted paths of the Imperial Gardens, Frederick felt the weight of the intercepted letter in his breast pocket. His orders were clear: any communication to Lady Whitfield from Russian sources must be reported immediately. Yet something held him back. "You seem troubled, Captain," she said, stopping to examine a winter-blooming hellebore. "Is it the cold?" "No, my lady." He hesitated, then reached into his pocket. "I must inform you that this correspondence was intercepted this morning." Her eyes widened at the sight of the letter, but not with fear, with recognition. "You've read it?" "No," he answered truthfully. "But I am required to report it." "And yet you haven't." Her gaze met his, searching. "Why?" Frederick had asked himself the same question all day. "I thought perhaps you might explain its contents first." She took the letter, her fingers brushing his. "It's from Countess Ivanovna, my mother's cousin. She writes about family matters only. Russian nobility corresponding with the British ambassador's daughter is never about family matters only, my lady." His voice was gentle despite the implied accusation. Lady Theodora's shoulders straightened. "Walk with me to the Gloriette, Captain. I'll explain, but not here where the walls have Habsburg ears." As they climbed toward the hilltop structure overlooking Vienna, she began to speak in hushed tones. "My mother's family has connections throughout Europe's courts. The Countess writes not of politics but of my cousin, a young woman who has found herself in an untenable position with a married Russian minister." "That seems a matter for her family to address," Frederick replied cautiously. "Her family has abandoned her. She's with child and desperate." Theodora's voice caught. "The Countess asks if I might help arrange passage for her to England, where she could live quietly with distant relatives." Frederick stopped walking. Such arrangements could be misconstrued as espionage, my lady. Especially in these times. Is compassion now espionage, Captain Grantham? Her eyes flashed. I thought Austria-Hungary prided itself on being civilized. The empire prides itself on security above all, he countered, then lowered his voice. But I understand your predicament. Perhaps there are channels that would not raise suspicions. Would you help me find them? Her question hung in the air between them, laden with implications. Before he could answer, the distant sound of approaching footsteps caused them both to stiffen. Frederick quickly adopted his formal posture as Count Metternich, a member of the Emperor's inner circle, came into view. Lady Whitfield, what a pleasant surprise, the Count said, his smile not reaching his eyes. Taking in our Austrian air. The Archduchess suggested it for my health, she replied smoothly. Captain Grantham has been kind enough to escort me. Indeed. The Count's gaze lingered on Frederick. Captain, I believe Colonel Haas was looking for you earlier. Something about rotation schedules. I shall report to him immediately after escorting Lady Whitfield back to the palace, Frederick responded. No need. I'll accompany the lady. You're dismissed, Captain. Frederick bowed stiffly, meeting Theodora's eyes briefly before departing. In that glance, he tried to convey what he couldn't say aloud, be careful. That evening, Frederick found himself summoned to Colonel Haas's office. The colonel, a stern man with a dueling scar across his left cheek, didn't look up from his papers when Frederick entered. Captain Grantham, I understand you've been Lady Whitfield's primary guard for 3 years now. Yes, Colonel. Long enough to develop observations about her character and habits. Frederick maintained his composure. She adheres to court protocol admirably, sir. Her behavior has been beyond reproach. And yet, the colonel said, finally looking up, she receives correspondence from Russian nobility that goes unreported. Frederick's blood ran cold. Sir, Count Metternich saw the letter in her possession this afternoon. A letter that, according to our postal surveillance, was intercepted this morning. The colonel's eyes narrowed. A letter you should have brought directly to me. I intended to investigate its contents before troubling you with what might be innocent correspondence, sir. Investigate? Colonel Haas laughed coldly. Your duty is to report, not investigate. Lady Whitfield's connections to Russian aristocracy are of particular interest given current tensions. She was merely, I don't recall asking for your assessment, Captain. The colonel stood, hands clasped behind his back. You are relieved of your duties regarding Lady Whitfield, effective immediately. Lieutenant Kraus will replace you. Frederick felt as though the ground had shifted beneath him. Sir, with respect, my familiarity with Lady Whitfield's routines ensures optimal security. Your familiarity is precisely the concern. Colonel Haas slid a document across the desk. You'll be transferred to the Emperor's Hunting Lodge Guard for the remainder of the season. Report to Captain Weber tomorrow at dawn. That night, Frederick paced his quarters, torn between duty and concern. Lieutenant Kraus was known for his ambition and rigid adherence to protocol. If Theodora attempted to help her cousin, Kraus would report her without hesitation. A soft knock interrupted his thoughts. He opened the door to find his colleague, Lieutenant Adler, looking anxiously down the corridor. I can't stay, Adler whispered, pressing a folded note into Frederick's hand. She asked me to deliver this. I owe you from Belgrade, consider us even. Before Frederick could respond, Adler disappeared down the hallway. Frederick closed the door and unfolded the note with trembling fingers. Captain Grantham I must speak with you before you depart. The Blue Salon, midnight. The guard will be Otto, he takes his coffee at 12:15 precisely. T.W. Frederick knew the risks were enormous. Meeting Lady Whitfield alone could cost him not just his position but possibly his freedom. Yet the thought of leaving her unprotected, with Kraus watching her every move, was unbearable. At midnight, the palace corridors were silent save for the occasional creak of ancient floorboards. Frederick, dressed in civilian clothes, navigated the servants' passages he had memorized years ago during security assessments. As predicted, Otto's post outside the blue salon was momentarily abandoned at 12:15. Frederick slipped inside to find Theodora standing by the window, a dark cloak covering her nightdress, her hair falling loose around her shoulders. She turned at his entrance, relief washing over her features. "You came," she whispered. "I shouldn't be here," he responded, keeping his distance despite every instinct urging him closer. "I know about your reassignment. Count Metternich was quite pleased to inform me." Her voice was bitter. "Lieutenant Kraus has already made it clear that my activities will be scrutinized most thoroughly." Theodora, it was the first time he had spoken her name, and it hung in the air between them, an intimacy neither had allowed before. "You must be careful. Whatever you planned for your cousin, it must wait until scrutiny lessens. She doesn't have time. The child comes in spring, and the minister has threatened exposure if she remains in Russia." Theodora stepped closer. "Frederick, I cannot abandon her." The sound of his given name on her lips made his resolve waver. "What would you have me do?" "I leave for the hunting lodge tomorrow. The lodge is near the Moravian border. My cousin could cross there, away from official checkpoints." Her eyes pleaded with him. "I can arrange for her travel to the border, but I need someone I trust to guide her to safety once she's in Austria." "You're asking me to commit treason," he said softly. "I'm asking you to save a life." She reached for his hand, her touch sending warmth through his veins despite the chill in the room. "I wouldn't ask if there were any other way." Before he could respond, footsteps in the corridor signaled Otto's return. Theodora quickly pressed something into Frederick's palm, a small jade pendant identical to the one she always wore. "My cousin will carry its match. Help her, Frederick. Please." He closed his fingers around the pendant and slipped into a concealed servant's door just as Otto's key turned in the lock. As he made his way back to his quarters, Frederick realized with startling clarity that his loyalty had shifted. Not to Britain or Russia, but to a woman whose courage had awakened his own. The Imperial hunting lodge in the Moravian highlands was a rustic contrast to the opulence of Schönbrunn Palace. Snow blanketed the surrounding forest, creating an isolation that normally would have granted Frederick peace. Instead, each day was an exercise in restraint as he performed his duties while secretly preparing for the arrival of Theodora's cousin. 2 weeks passed before a local boy delivered a message, *The package arrives at dusk, St. Agnes Day, at the forester's cabin. Frederick knew the location, a small outpost at the edge of the Imperial hunting grounds, rarely used in winter. On St. Agnes Day, Frederick volunteered for the evening patrol, ensuring he would be alone near the border. As dusk fell, he made his way through snow-laden trees to the forester's cabin. Smoke curled from the chimney, someone had arrived ahead of him. Inside, he found not the Russian cousin he expected, but Theodora herself, wrapped in furs, her face flushed from the cold. "What are you doing here?" he demanded, shock overriding protocol. "Where is your cousin?" "There is no cousin, Frederick." She removed her gloves slowly. "There never was." He stared at her, unable to comprehend. The letter was genuine, but not about a pregnant cousin. She stepped closer, her expression resolute despite the fear in her eyes. "It was about me." "You?" Realization dawned slowly, then all at once. "You're carrying a child." She nodded, one hand moving instinctively to her stomach, still flat beneath her heavy clothing. "A child that cannot exist in the eyes of Viennese society, or British, for that matter." Frederick's mind raced. "The father is gone. Back to St. Petersburg with his wife." Her voice was steady, but tears threatened at the corners of her eyes. "He was not who I believed him to be. When I told him, he suggested solutions that I would not consider." Frederick felt a surge of anger toward this unknown Russian, followed by an overwhelming protectiveness. "Why come to me?" "Because you see me," she said simply. Not as the ambassador's daughter or a political asset, but as myself. Because in 3 years, you've shown me more honor in silence than most men show with grand declarations. I'm a guard, Theodora. I have nothing to offer you. You have integrity, she countered. And I need safe passage to my mother's family in Scotland, where the child can be raised as a distant orphaned relative. I cannot travel officially, my father would be ruined, and the Russians would use it as leverage. Frederick turned away, conflicted. His duty to the Empire warred with his growing feelings for this woman who had trusted him with her most vulnerable secret. If I'm discovered helping you, it would be considered desertion at best, treason at worst. I know what I ask. She touched his arm gently. I will understand if you refuse. He looked down at her hand on his sleeve, then met her gaze. When do we leave? Relief flooded her features. Tonight. I have papers and money. A carriage waits in the village to take us to Prague, where we can board a train north. There are patrols, he warned. And I'm expected back at the lodge by midnight. Then we have 3 hours to disappear. They set out into the snowy forest, Frederick leading them along game trails to avoid the main paths where Imperial guards might patrol. The cold intensified as night deepened, their breath clouding before them as they trudged through knee-deep snow. Tell me about Scotland, Frederick said as they walked, partly to distract her from the bitter cold, partly because he realized how little he knew of her life beyond Vienna. It's green, she replied, her voice dreamlike. Greener than you can imagine. My grandmother's home sits above a loch, surrounded by hills that change color with the seasons. In summer, they're purple with heather. It sounds peaceful. It is. Remote enough that questions aren't asked about distant relatives who suddenly appear. She stumbled slightly, and he caught her arm. Sorry. The path is treacherous. We should rest a moment. He guided her toward a fallen log cleared of snow. As they sat, Theodora suddenly tensed. Listen. Frederick heard it too, the distant sound of voices and horses. A patrol, and from the direction, they were heading straight for the forester's cabin. They're looking for us, he said grimly. Someone must have seen you arrive. What do we do? Frederick calculated quickly. The village is still 2 miles ahead. If they find the cabin empty, they'll spread out to search the forest. Could we hide somewhere? Not in this snow. Our tracks would lead them straight to us. He stood, decision made. There's an old charcoal burner's hut about half a mile east. We'll head there, then double back toward the Czech farmlands once the patrol passes. They moved as quickly as the snow allowed, the sounds of the patrol growing fainter as they diverted eastward. The charcoal burner's hut was little more than a stone shelter with a partially collapsed roof, but it offered momentary reprieve from the wind and searching eyes. Inside, Frederick brushed snow from a rough bench. Rest. I'll watch for the patrol. Theodora sank down gratefully. In the dim moonlight filtering through the damaged roof, she looked both vulnerable and determined, a contradiction that had drawn him to her from the beginning. You're risking everything for me, she said softly. Why? Frederick remained by the doorway, watching for movement in the forest. Perhaps for the same reason you trusted me with your secret. And what reason is that? He turned to look at her, finally allowing himself to acknowledge what he had denied for 3 years. Because sometimes duty speaks less loudly than the heart. The confession hung between them, neither able to bridge the distance with the patrol still searching nearby. But something had shifted, an understanding reached in the quiet of the abandoned hut. They're moving west, Frederick finally said, breaking the silence. We should continue while we have the chance. They reached the village shortly before midnight, finding the promised carriage waiting at the edge of town. The driver, an older Czech man who asked no questions, helped them inside and covered their legs with heavy blankets before setting off toward Prague. As the carriage rocked along the snowy road, Theodora's exhaustion finally overcame her. She drifted to sleep, her head coming to rest against Frederick's shoulder. He remained awake, alert to every sound, his hand near the pistol concealed beneath his coat. In Prague, they boarded the early train to Dresden, the first step in a journey that would take them through Germany, the Netherlands, and finally by ship to Scotland. Each border crossing brought new tension, each unfamiliar face a potential threat. Yet as they traveled further from Vienna, Frederick felt the weight of imperial duty lifting, replaced by something both lighter and more profound, the duty of one heart to another. On their third night of travel, in a small Dutch inn near the coast, Theodora finally asked the question that had hovered between them. "What will you do, Frederick, after we reach Scotland?" He looked up from the map he'd been studying. "I hadn't thought beyond getting you safely to your grandmother's home." "You cannot return to Austria," she said, stating what both knew to be true. "They will be searching for you." "No," he agreed. "That life is behind me now." Theodora hesitated, then spoke with careful deliberation. "My grandmother's estate needs a steward. The position comes with a cottage on the grounds." Frederick understood what she was offering, proximity without presumption, a new beginning that honored the boundaries between them. "I know nothing of managing Scottish estates," he said with a small smile. "You managed to navigate imperial court politics for 6 years. Highland sheep should pose less of a challenge." Her answering smile held a warmth he had rarely seen in Vienna. "Besides, the child will need someone to teach them about honor and duty, the true kind, not what courts and empires pretend it to be." The mention of the child sobered him. "Theodora, I would never presume. I'm not asking for declarations, Frederick. Those belong to romantic novels, not to people like us who have seen the hollow promises of the powerful." She reached across the table, her fingers brushing his. "I'm asking if you might consider building a new life, your own life, somewhere you could be free. Somewhere not far from us." Frederick turned his hand to hold hers properly, no longer the guard and the lady, but a man and a woman facing an uncertain future together. "I would consider that," he said softly. "Very much." 2 days later, they boarded a small merchant vessel bound for Edinburgh. As the Dutch coastline receded, Theodora stood at the rail, the wind whipping her hair free from its pins. Frederick joined her, maintaining a respectable distance even now. "Do you regret it?" she asked, eyes on the horizon. "Leaving everything behind?" Frederick considered the question. He had abandoned his position, his country, the only life he had known since boyhood. Yet watching Theodora's profile against the setting sun, he felt no regret, only the certainty that comes with finally choosing one's own path. "No," he answered truthfully. "Some duties are chains disguised as honor. Others—" He paused, finding words for feelings long suppressed. "Others set you free, even when they ask everything of you." Theodora turned to him then, the last light of day illuminating tears in her eyes, not of sorrow, but of recognition. She reached for his hand, no longer constrained by the watching eyes of an empire that had bound them both in different ways. "Then let us be free together," she whispered, as the ship carried them toward the misty shores of Scotland and the promise of a life where hearts, not duty, would guide their way.